India-Pakistan War 1965 is a small war game. In fact, it is published in the Tiny Battle Line. It comes in a Ziploc bag. It includes this rulebook here that also acts as the cover of the package. Very short rulebook, and it also includes instructions for the scenarios and the specific installment of the system and 3 scenarios. Then we have a paper map, pretty thin, but it's only folded into the original package, so it lays down flat on the table quite well. A nice player aid with combat tables and the range table on one side and with the terrain table on the other side, plus some notes here. You have a small deck of cards used to perform special actions and to take advantage of special circumstances during the game. And then we have counters. The counter tray that you see here, I've added, is not in the original package. You got a good selection here of counters. But as for the counters themselves, taking a closer look, just to see how they work and also to talk about the production. Not all the counters ended up being cut well from the original sheet, meaning that the cut is not always in the center. I mean, you can clearly tell that there was supposed to be a frame around the central area, and the cut's a little too high, and that's for most counters, but not for all of them. In some cases, a little more visible. Also, the cut didn't go through the paper all that well, so in some cases, as you may notice, the edges are a little rough. That's because I cut the uncut sheet between counters using scissors. You probably have better technical skills than I do and more patience. You're going to cut them with an X-Acto knife. It's going to look better than the original cut went well, but they're just these small production issues here that make the counters look a little less pretty than they otherwise would be. And you know how we're gamers like to depict themselves as tough, but then, oh my gosh, that counter doesn't have clipped corners. Yee! Anyways, war gamers can be pretty finicky about the quality of the counters. What I really care about is that a counter is readable, and the information on these counters, and there's a lot of it, is presented quite well. The illustration in the center of the counter indicates if a unit is a leg unit or an armor unit. As for all of those numbers that you see there, the number here on top is the firepower, the firepower value that is used against armor. And there's a number here in the top right that is the armor factor. In fact, as you can see, leg units do not have an armor factor, which makes perfect sense. The color in the background also indicates the type of range that that unit has. And again, comparing leg and armor gives us a sense of how those are different. The number in the bottom left corner of each counter is the combat value, combat factor that is used against soft units. Then here in the corner we have the value that is used in close assault. And then finally here in the middle of the bottom line we have the movement factor. And it is an explosion behind the movement factor that indicates that the unit can move and fire. In my days, movement factor was here in the bottom right corner, and all of the combat factor was on the left and in the middle, all the combat factors, but days change, time goes by, etc., etc., etc. The counters in general, very readable, very usable. Now, as for turn sequence, at the beginning of each turn, the players will roll to determine who has initiative. Then, once you determine that, players will draw action cards. You may play up to 2 action cards per turn, but you only get 1 in the initial phase of each turn. Then you're at the rally phase. Players may have units that are disrupted from the previous turn, in which case for each disrupted unit you get to roll a die, a 6-sided die. The game only uses 6-sided dice, and if you roll equal to or lower than the morale of the unit is rallied and you can remove the disrupted marker. The morale of the unit is not printed on the counter. The scenario instructions or the instructions for the module in the system that you're playing will tell you what the morale of the units is. In this game, for example, all units in all scenarios have a morale factor of 3. So after the rally is done, units that are not disrupted, suppose we don't have any of those, hooray, can get to act. And there is a fire phase. Players alternate attacks, okay, they can use their units to fire at the opponent. And I like the fact that it's alternate. I fire with one, you fire with one, they still can fire, and so on and so forth. It's not like I fire all of my units, destroy, and then you would like to fire, but it's too late for you to do so. And units that fire are marked with a fire marker. To fire, units need to be in range of their enemy or their target. They need to have a line of sight. Pretty common sense, pretty basic sense here. And we'll talk about how you resolve combat later. Then, after players have used all the units that they wanted to use to fire, there's the movement phase in which first one player, then the other can move all of their units. So there's a difference here. In fire, you do get to alternate, but in movement is, oh, I go with all of mine, you go with all of yours. But at that point, it's a little less tragic. There may also be game effects that allow you to perform opportunity fire, such as from this card. Movement is pretty basic. You move up to your full movement allowance, and the number of movement points that you spend is based on the terrain of the X that you're entering. Finally, after movement, players may, they do not have to, declare close assault with units that they have that are adjacent to enemy units. And again, it is not mandatory to perform close assault. Talking about combat, so we can look at the combat table and get a sense of how fire results and close assault results are determined. First, you will look at the when you're firing, you look at the right, and suppose you're resolving a fire against soft targets. You look at the fire column, which is the rightmost that you find, which is equal to or as close as possible to your fire factor. Suppose I'm firing with 8, I will use this column here. If I'm firing with 7, then I'm using this column here. Well, am I using it? Maybe or maybe not, because you have to take into account modifiers that may cause your column to shift. For example, terrain may cause shifts in fire combat as well as in close assault. Also, range matters. To determine if there is a modification when you're firing based on range, you look at the color, remembering the background of the fire combat that you're using. For example, if the color is black, you do not have to worry about range because you can only act in adjacent hexes. If, for example, you are firing with a unit that is orange, has an orange firepower, then you will determine what short range is, what normal range is, and what long range is looking at this table. And then you look at this part of the table telling you what short, normal, and long range mean in terms of the column. So for example, if I have 7, I use this column, but suppose that I am at short range, then I get a shift of a column to the right. I mean to the right is the direction here. Once you have that, you roll your die and two dice and you cross-reference the result with the column that you're using. Firing against armor targets is the same thing. It's just that instead of using the raw firepower of your units like you do when you're firing against a soft target, you use the armor penetration value of your unit, subtracting the armor value of the target. So if my factor against the armor is 14, the opponent has an armor of 10, I will use this column here, taking modifiers into account. The number that you see here that you determine, once you find the column, roll the dice, cross-reference, the number that you see here is the number of possible hits that the opponent takes. For each unit in the number of possible hits, the opponent rolls a die, and for each against their morale, and for each fail morale test, so basically this is the number of morale tests that the target unit must take. For each morale test that is failed, the unit does receive a hit. The first hit disrupts a unit, the second hit flips a unit to its reduced effectiveness side, and a third hit removes the unit from the battlefield. The unit is out. Close assault is resolved after combat, after movement, as we said. It works similarly to the main assault, but instead of using just the combat factor of your unit or the difference between armor value, armor attack versus armor value, what you use here is a ratio between the close assault value of your units, the units that are attacking versus the close assault value of the units that are being attacked. So you will express that in a ratio 2 to 1, 1 to 1, 3 to 1 to determine the column. Again, shifts may apply, and the numbers that you see here, possible hits that will be assigned respectively to the defender or to the attacker. Again, these possible hits really correspond to morale tests that the target unit must take to determine how many of these possible hits will result in actual hits. Another concept in the game is the idea of the focus marker. Each player has one, and they have 1 dice printed on them and 2 dice printed on the other side. In other games in the system, there will also be similar markers called aid markers. Here we only had the focus markers that represent really the special attention, the special care that the commander is giving to a specific area of operation, maybe yelling orders a little more loud than somewhere else, or sending help, supplies, that kind of stuff. These markers, there is a phase during the turn when the marker can be added, can be moved around, they can be assigned to a unit and then they can move with the unit, or they may be flipped from the 1 die side to the 2 dice side. When you're using the marker, guess what? The marker gives you a reroll. So basically you're moving your special attention from one area to the other, and in the area to which you're devoting particular care that you're focusing on, one of your units will be able to reroll a die. Victory conditions will change depending on the scenario that is played. I realize I may have said that the game has 3 scenarios earlier. It has 5 actually. And victory conditions depend on the scenario, but they're usually based on control of key locations on the board, or elimination of enemy units, or exiting units from specific areas of the map. Nice, simple, enjoyable. India-Pakistan War is one of those games that are the closest thing I can think of to a filler war game. Again, when I talk about fillers that are not war games, I'm thinking about 20 minutes. When I'm speaking about a filler war game, I'm thinking about something that takes 5-10 minutes or less to set up and plays in about an hour. And this is pretty much what the kind of investment in time that you can expect for a scenario. And you have several, so that's pretty neat. It is the kind of game that you can put on the table, set up easily, late at night if you can play solo, when no one is around, and you still need a little bit of your wargaming fix before the night is over. It is a game that you can use to introduce new players to the beautiful art of wargaming. Definitely not complex, so definitely all the concepts that are in here are easy to grasp. Some of the original things, such as the focus marker that you need to move around, who knows, maybe those will seem more intuitive to non-war gamers rather than war gamers that will have to unlearn a couple of things or adjust to that idea after they have been very well set in their ways. So, a simple, nice game that can be used in a variety of ways and can be enjoyed in a variety of ways, especially, again, when you want to wargame, but you do not have time to set up something bigger, something more epic. And this is really the key here. The advantages, the positives of this game are also its limitations. On one hand, you can just put it on the table, set it up easily, and play quickly with a very nice flow, but precisely because of this, it will never raise to a level of epic expression. In terms of complexity, reminded me a little bit of Eastfront. Oh, sorry, of Tank on Tank. I have the Eastfront set. On the shelf, I also had the Westfront set, and also had the older version. I really like Tank on Tank. It's a great introductory game. I would say if you are schooling, if you are training your friends to become more gamers, after they play the Tank on Tank, this could be a nice, logical, easy next step. Because there's a little more complexity, but not much. It feels like it's a line of continuity there. So India-Pakistan War, pretty nice. The scenarios play differently for one another. Production is okay with some minor things about the counter that did not detach all that well from one another. But there are people that are craftier than me, have better mental skills, and they will be able to detach the counters and make them look more crisp than mine look. I like the art, actually. I really like the art. I like the fact that you have art both for the vehicles, for the armored units, and also for the leg units. Very often the infantry is represented by a NATO symbol, and all the tanks, the armored vehicles by illustration. That's like a tradition in wargaming almost. Here everybody gets their own little picture, which is nice. So the game looks nice overall, with some minor things here and there, but most importantly, it plays well, it plays easily, very enjoyable, very simple. Closest thing I can think of a filler war game, but maybe a better way of saying it is that this is a small game. It's a little game, yes, but it's a nice little game.